Welcome to Life on Life's Terms, episode 45. We have the wonderful, amazingly talented Chris Sucha, who has a plethora of time in the addictions world and has been a counselor within that world for quite some time. How's your day today, Chris?
Good.
Yeah. So today we're going to kind of get into things like self-care for counselors.
Okay.
And this is the Sober October kind of theme for Life on Life's Terms.
Okay.
So a lot of the things that we've been kind of discussing over the last month is recovery. And we kind of designate to this month to that. I think one of the people that are always forgotten within the addiction field is the actual counselors themselves. We always focus on the addict and how to get them to treatment, but how do we keep the so-called engine of addiction treatment going in a healthy way? You have how many years again in the...
Well, combined would be 44 plus years.
Wow.
In the addiction scene. Yeah.
And I think statistically speaking, it's like a 6-year burnout rate is what I hear. So how did, in your own personal experience, how did you get past that 6-year burnout rate and continue on to like 44 years worth of service?
Well, one of my earlier mentors, I was pretty early in the field, was Dr. Gary Ford, who was mentoring my walk. And one of the things he told me, he said, it appears that you like to think you can fix people, send them feeling recovered. He says, and I never forget that. He says, sometimes you got to have to leave them smelling of shit when they leave, because you can care for, but you cannot take care of.
Yeah.
I was quite upset, to be honest, because as being in the helping profession, I thought that was my job.
Yeah.
And then I had time to sit back and reflect in that statement. And there's so much merits. We are there for them, we can care for, but we cannot take care of.
Yeah.
It is unlike medicine, for example, where it's very different. You're dealing with people's issue, you play a very, very key role with telling them and bringing up ideas, things that they can do to help get themselves in a better plane, so to speak. But you cannot make it happen. They have to take responsibility. So that was a real eye-opener for me in terms of standing back, and then and that's the approach I take. So yes, some situations, you leave that counseling session and you feel really, really emotionally down. But you have to find healthy ways. I can talk to my colleagues, or sometimes I just ventilate, or I would come home and my wife would see that look in my face, and I said, I just need some time to thaw off, the deprogram, because some of the stories you hear are very heart-wrenching.
Yeah. I think one of the catch terms that I heard a little while ago was secondary grievance. So like as a counselor, you hear the person's testimony. I don't really like the word story because we as addicts say stories a lot, which implies a lie, right? In my opinion. So you'd hear a client's testimony of what had happened, and then next thing you know, you're kind of feeling guilt-ridden from what they had gone through, right? Is there anything that you would suggest that somebody could do in the moment when you feel that happening, or what could a stop sign be to recognize, in your own words, that might be happening in the moment?
Well, one of the things I say to my clients is, and they have shared some very, very traumatic things in their life. But they have to feel that level of comfort.
Okay.
That they are not going to be judged, that they are not going to be labeled, because they already have experienced those traumatic experiences in their life. For example, right now I'm working with a lady, wouldn't call names. I mean, she was actually felt in love with her stepbrother. She had a sexual relationship with him. And then she was sexually abused over a number of years by two of her paternal uncles. And she is really heavy into the addiction right now. And she is making some slow recovery. But the thing is that you have to demonstrate you care for, they can trust you. I think that's the very key thing in terms of relationship with your clients. and a lot of them are vulnerable.
I think that's the other thing too is counselors in the field, I would say that they want to help, and sometimes the client themselves just aren't ready in order to engage that kind of help. They're entertaining it because of legality issues or whatever it is. So, I mean, for counselors to see that success is very difficult. Because that on the front line may be what you're dealing with a majority of the time. So how would you suggest to deal with that when you're seeing that as a counselor coming in where, you know, people are trying to be engaged, they're trying to be engaged. However, they just don't really want what you're selling.
Right.
You know what I mean? So how do you deal with that as a counselor?
Well, one of the things I say to clients, I said, sometimes I may ask certain questions. I said, if you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to answer it. So you give them that permission, because they're very needy, and by asking questions, they feel maybe they're obliged to, and it shouldn't be that way. As time goes on, they may share more and more. So you give them that space, and they respect you.
Yeah. I think one of the things too that I've engaged in with working with clients is to do personal things with them. So like one of the things that I've been doing, because I'm more of a life coach, I would suggest at this moment, than I am at in any other capacity. So one of the things I like to do is if they like to work out or whatever, I try to work out with them, and then there becomes almost an amicability between us. And then because it's more of a light life coach scenario, you become almost an example of of mentoringship in the moment, right? And I think in a counseling aspect, is there a way to do that? Because of course you have that line that you can't really pass for professionalism, right? So, but is there a technique that a counselor might be able to use in order to find that place to foster like an example to the client?
Yes, we look at the community resources that are out there in terms of things that they can engage. As a counselor, you have to be very, very careful to not engage with the client in those things, because sometimes it can be misconstrued, or you put yourself, a liability issue becomes clear. So I always maintain that professional distance.
Yeah.
But I look at community resources, like, for example, what can you do to relax?
Okay.
Sometimes people, it may be a financial hardship, so you look like things where the wife, for example, depending on your income, they would give you free membership or reduced membership. So you look at community resources whereby they can do things to relax, to get fit, and then you discuss things like observing nature.
Okay.
Going for walks that doesn't really cost any money, right?
Yeah.
So it's getting them to make lifestyle changes.
Okay.
Especially if they have been addicted on alcohol or drugs for many, many years. That has become a way of life. And making changes is not easy. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
We are creatures of habit.
Yeah,
right?
100%, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like I teach the impaired drivers program, and I says, no one in this room can look me in the eye and say it's the first time or the only time you have driven impaired. And they laugh, because I said some people, their number hasn't come up as yet.
Yeah.
But if you engage in those risk-taking behaviors, that's the potential.
Yeah. One of the other things too that was brought up, so of course, when you were here last time on the show called Drug Treatment Evolution, or the Evolution of Drug Treatment is what it was called, there was questions from some of the people who had listened to that show, and one of them was, how do you know that you need to switch your role as a counselor? Like if you're, for instance, frontline, and maybe you need to go work in a treatment center, what could be a sign for you to say to yourself, yeah, I need to switch roles. I'm still okay to be in this field, but I just have to go to a different setting almost. What would you suggest might be, because the comment that we got was, I don't know if I should change my role yet. How do I know? What could be a sign for me to change my role?
Well, I don't know if I can give you any particular triggers, because I'm in a very fortunate situation where I have done a variety of different things. Currently, what I do, I work with a lot of people who have breached the law. I also supervise large group. In my private counseling, I engage individuals, engage couples. Currently, I'm seeing like 2 families, who wants to participate in the counseling and in the healing process. So that question, I really cannot say clearly. Well, I know I need to switch that because I have been most of my working career.
Okay.
Have been lucky, because one of my big areas of counseling is working with families.
Yeah.
I like the family dynamics because you get the true picture as opposed to the individual. Sometimes they're not lying, but because they're seeing the situation completely different from how other significant others.
I think what I kind of got out of that too is so I work with a lot of people one-on-one, like the actual addicts. So I don't get a lot of the family. Sometimes I do. I've done the capacity of an intervention, right?
I've done a few of those too.
and what I've always found interesting with the family is they don't bullshit as much as the addict does.
Correct.
The addict really likes to keep you in different compartments, and they. In Seinfeld, there was an episode with George Costanza where he was like, the worlds of George are colliding. And this was his girlfriend meeting his parents, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's happening for the addict a lot of times, right? So in that capacity, as a counselor, how do you deal with that, with the family dynamic? Do you just basically cut through the bullshit and kind of get them to sit in it, or do you ease the impact a little bit? How do you deal with that?
Well, I play the referee there, and I tell them to do some careful listening. For example, this one young lady, very beautiful young lady, teenage, her dad, it's the way she sees it, she says, Chris, he only needs to quit drinking. And I said, that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Right? So the perception of family members may be very different as opposed to how the addict sees it. And sometimes they don't connect the dots. So that's where you as a counselor come in, because you're there to not take sides, but to clearly be the referee for a better choice of word. Yeah,
that's excellent.
But to be candid.
Yeah.
From your professional experience and background.
Yeah.
Call a spade a spade.
Yeah. I think that's sometimes I find counselors have a real issue with that because they're trying to pacify and placate as opposed to just saying, like, this is what it is. Wham, bam, this is what it is. We're not messing around. Let's carry on. Like for instance, I've been talking at EYOC, right? And which is, for those listeners, Edmonton Youth Offender Center, which is high-risk youth. And the first thing I say in my speech is, look, my parents messed me up. Your parents messed you up. Let's move on.
Correct.
Right? Because the second that we recognize that and we find that, then we can say, okay, let's move on, because we don't have to have that label on us anymore. Yeah. A lot of people, though, will try to pull you back into that.
Right.
And the family almost fosters that kind of energy. I've seen that too, where they're like, well, it's not your fault that you're messed up. It's the system. It's this. It's that. It's whatever. Well, guess what? The system is the system. It's not going to change at any given time. But the reality is that, we're the ones who have to change the label upon us, because if change doesn't happen with us, it's never going to happen. Right. And so actually these youth are really, really responding to that, because we're not sitting there saying, my family did this, and it's not a one-upmanship. You know what I mean? I find that with the youth, it's more so of a one-upmanship than it is with adults, because adults in active addiction, in reality, don't even remember why they're so angry about using anymore. They just know that it's a part of their life. With the youth, what I've come to understand is they're still angry, and they know what they're angry about. Right? And especially the pain and the torture of the family, or whatever they've come from, right? Whatever the trauma or the abuse is, it's still readily accessible in their brain. Whereas with addiction and long-term going, you don't really remember. Some of it you do, some of it you don't.
Sometimes it's a legacy, and they need to understand, well, mom must have had something in her background, or dad. But a young person don't understand that. They're just seeing the here and now. So I think to do that bit of historical analysis is very, very key. And you could take several individuals and say in the same life experiences, and guess what? Each one will probably react to that very differently.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can give you a couple of examples. When I was back in the Caribbean, I was teaching school. One of my good colleagues, his dad was a raging alcoholic. He would come home in the middle of the night, and wake up the family, and he would physically and verbally abuse them. And, after school, we would go out to the bar. He never touched a drop of alcohol. And he very successful, but he cannot relax.
Oh,
He always felt that it was his fault. If I would be successful and be a good guy, my dad wouldn't drink.
oh, wow.
And even the last time I was down there, we went out and he still doesn't touch a drop of alcohol.
Wow. Wow.
But he said, but Chris, I'm beginning to learn to relax a little bit now. So this is how things can happen. I have another chap. He was in my class, and nice young man. He came in and he says, Chris, I screwed up. I drunk and drove. I don't have a problem. So during the course of the day, he began to share some stuff, and his parents are very wealthy. They own 3 hotels. And he says, as a little kid, there was parties every weekend. I would go around and empty the dregs from the glass, right? And his mom, because he was a little hyper kid, would put a half ounce of vodka in a bottle for him to sleep.
Wow.
And at the end of the day, he came and he was livid. And I said, why? He was such a nice young man this morning. He says, I learned I have a serious drinking problem. And it wasn't from negative experience.
Oh, I see.
So that's what I'm saying, that people, it don't necessarily have to be a traumatic negative experiences.
I see. Yeah.
It can be a pleasant thing.
I mean, I know. Yeah. That's definitely a different side of looking at that. I've never, to be honest with you, I've only ever seen more trauma than I've ever seen anything where it's like kind of that positive piece that just keeps rolling, right?
The traumatic experiences far outnumber that example, but it's a factor too. And sometimes that's easy to miss.
Yeah. I could see that. Like, why would you have a drinking problem? Your life is pretty well white picket fence. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another big topic that's been hitting this podcast is how do professionals deal with suicide when their clients have committed suicide in a healthy way? There's a couple points that we're going to go over, but I just want to hear your thoughts about that, just in a generic way or a general way.
Yeah. It's pretty well my standard turnaround to people when they talk about suicide or attempted suicide. I said, you know what? It's a choice that we have. Rather than just falling over, no, you shouldn't do that. I said, and that wakes them up. It's a choice that you have. But there are so many different options. Why don't you give yourself a time frame to try some of these things?
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, you can always go back and commit suicide.
Yeah.
And psychologically, what you're doing, you putting them in charge of the decisions they make, rather than just wailing and saying, no, don't do that. And you're saying it in a very caring way. It doesn't mean to be sarcastic or condescending, because when you stop back and seriously look at it, it's a choice we have.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I agree. I've dealt with, so I came up with a figure of 75 suicides I've seen in 5 years through recovery, whether it be by actively committing suicide through an overdose or hanging themselves or a physical means, right? And I've always said it's great that we have all of these phone numbers that you can call, like helpline and all that stuff. But sometimes what the issue becomes is that there's a 1-ton elephant sitting on your phone, and the suicide attempt is more successful than you finding help in that moment.
Correct.
And that's really the unfortunate, because really the people who are going to grieve about this are your loved ones. You know what I mean? Those are the ones who are really going to end up carrying your pain, right? And I agree. It is a decision. I just wrote in a blog, which would be last week, basically about when suicide happens, we need to find a lifeline with somebody who we understand, or somebody who we can go to that we know that cares about us, that understands depression and may have had suicidal thoughts and has overcome them. And this shouldn't be, in my opinion, your mother, your wife, your children, or any family member, because they're so easily dismissed. You can dismiss what they're saying because of your anger about being upset or wallowing within that depression, right? And this, to me, has been my lifeline, and this has helped me get out of depression, right? This guy, when I call him, I quite often check in with him, and I'll say, hey, this is what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And he'll say, get your ass out of your head, or get your head out of your ass and start doing something, because you're slipping right now and you're going to fall into a depression. And I'm saying this because I care about you, because I want you to hang around as opposed to being where you could be. I'm going to help you stop this now. And by putting up those stop signs prior to getting to that low place has really helped me from, one, not having any medication. I'm not on any medication today. And it's also helped me to have a clear perspective of myself through what we would call like a moral mirror, right? And then I can continue. But it has to be somebody that I actually respect.
Right.
If it's not, bets are off.
Right.
Would you consider that as being a good tool for a vast majority of people once they're out of counseling, so to say?
Well, of course, because going back to what I said earlier, it's a choice that we have. There are a range. Okay, some people may be threatening suicide as a way of getting attention, not that they don't have underlying issues, but they're not really, really serious, but it's a cry for help.
Okay. Then
you have some who you need to be hospitalized, and unfortunately, it's not easy having someone committed.
Yeah. Here in Canada, it isn't.
It is. It's changed over the years.
Yeah.
Or someone needs medication, like some cases of depression. It's they need to be under some type of medical help, or in an inpatient setting. So every suicidal case is very different. So we have to get a good sense of the background, as to what are some of the underlying occurring disorders.
Okay.
And then we can begin to address that.
Okay. Another question that came out from one of the listeners out there was, how do you deal with suicide when your client has committed suicide? So it's the after. Being a counselor, how do you detach? And what's the healthiest way of detaching? So I would assume that this has happened in your career
at some point. Of times.
And so what's the healthy way of detaching, and what's an unhealthy way of detaching, is kind of their question.
Yeah. Well, for me, I can speak personally, is that I would talk to one of my colleagues.
Okay.
Especially if it's a client whereby I had a long-standing relationship, because you build up some emotional attachment. But again, keeping yourself professionally detached. I would talk sometimes with the family.
Okay.
With regards to the situation, to see how they're feeling. And that's also healing for me.
Okay.
Because hearing their thoughts and how they're coping, and how it helps me in terms of, the type of loss. So that's the healthy way, I think. And as I said, I have a network of colleagues that if it's really getting to me, I will talk to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would be an unhealthy, have you seen unhealthy ways of somebody learning or trying to detach from a suicide? Because I think I think one of the questions too, that the reason why this was being asked was because they're not really sure if they're doing this in a healthy way or an unhealthy way. So have you ever observed maybe one of your colleagues or so on and so forth that might have detached in an unhealthy way. They still did it, but it carried on for a longer period of time, so to say.
Well, over the years, I have had a couple of colleagues who actually ended up committing suicide.
Oh,
They were
wow.
addictions counselor. It turned out after the fact that we got to learn that he had a very serious addiction issue, and he covered it up really well. He was on the job, and I guess it got to the point where he, his way out was suicide. Okay, so the thing is that each case is really different, but if you sense it, I think it's important to, as a good working colleague, to say, hey, I see a real difference in you.
Okay.
Is there something going on? And if they open up, you offer that help.
Okay.
Not necessarily counsel them, but say, hey, you should take time off, you should go see a doctor, you should go see a psychologist.
Okay.
Well, it's pretty common, like, post-traumatic stress disorder is a good example,
Yeah.
where it wasn't even recognized here
Yeah.
until a number of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And as I said, you can put some people with same life experiences and they would deal with it very differently. And some people, it gets them. We just saw the young lady in Quebec, very
Yeah.
beautiful young lady, committed suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder. So I think the workplace needs to be cognizant of some of these indicators. There are indicators. For example, if you're always a very happy kind of person, right? And then, Chris is not the person I know.
Yeah.
What's going, and I've had people ask me that, Chris, you seem so quiet today, but it was more, I was physically not well.
Okay.
So just for friends to reach out like that and colleagues, I think it's important. It's not intrusion.
Okay.
But I think the workplace has to foster that.
Do you also, so you and I had spoken about with the program that you and I are involved with St. Dismas House Society, when we were talking about having the staff come together once a week or once every 2 weeks to unload, and you sitting in that room to do that. Do you think that that's more advantageous than each staff going home and like unloading with family, so on and so? Because I mean, either way, that release valve's going to get released. And I think in the context of the staff doing it with each other, like almost like a blow off session once a week or once every couple weeks or whatnot.
Debriefing, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we get that really in a shift change. So for those out there who aren't counselors and are just listening to the show, basically a shift change for most people who are in front lines is basically the night shift passing over information to the day shift. And that's supposed to be a debriefing period, but there's not enough time to really debrief about everything that's happened. And then you end up carrying your stuff or the stuff that happened the night before to the next shift, and then all of a sudden you're off and you're still carrying this at home even for some, unless you're doing something for aftercare for yourself, right? So would you see that if employers who are working in the healthcare field, like Alberta Health Services or Ontario OHIP, Ontario Health Insurance Plan, all those workers, would you consider or would you suggest to them that they should allow their counselors to kind of have like that debriefing once a week? Do you think that would be advantageous for them to give?
Yeah, they also have to assure the employees it's a safe environment to do so. And it's not going to go against them.
Yeah.
Okay. Like a lot of companies I know now, with some of my clients in the workplace, they have what we call support groups. During lunch break, no one is forced to do it, but employees, what do we do? They share, not necessarily, it could be domestic issues, it can be separation, divorce, it can be number of issues, but they get together and employers encourage it. So more and more, we need to see that happening. Because sometimes, look at nurses, doctors in the emergency department. We tend to forget them because we think they're health professionals. But they're human beings. And underneath, it pays heavy burden.
Well, and I think that's one of the issues that counselors, like I said, we always talk about the addict and we always talk about how to get them to treatment, but how do counselors keep themselves healthy, right? Within that time, because if there's anything that's different or clearly different between somebody who's like a life coach and somebody who's a counselor,
right?
As a counselor has an hour. A life coach is somebody who's going to be answering their phone at 7 or 8 o'clock at night and continuing on with the process of what this is in a real-time mentoring capacity. And I think for counselors, they hear a lot of the shit or a lot of the harshness of what's going on in that person's life in a short amount of time, and then trying to fix that within the last 15 or 30 minutes of that counseling session. And so to take that again and again, let's say 8 clients a day, because you're working 8-hour days, it's difficult to continuously move forward with your own counseling style, even, especially when you see so many of your clients not really ready for what you're ready to give them. And then they fall off basically. And then they may come back later, but they may not, right?
Self-care. And I think the workplace have to provide that safe environment.
Yeah, I agree.
I know a lot of companies do that, but still, it's in some areas, some employees don't even want to come forward because they think it might go against them.
So I'll tell you this too. If you remember in the last episode, we were talking about how DARE doesn't work, right? There was a principal in a school who got back to me saying that she's actually glad that DARE is no longer part of the curriculum anymore after especially hearing what we were saying. But she was saying, what can we do to help the youth? And I think we cleared that. But I think also in this capacity with your aftercare, I mean, you're a true testament of 44 years in the field and still being in the field without having that 6-year, 5-year burnout period, right? And so what are some of the things that you do personally for your own your own self-care?
Well, one of the things, as I say, I don't take the workload at home. The odd time I do, because it's a very traumatic experience. But I would talk to a friend or my wife, or sometimes I just say, listen, I'm going to the gym to work out. I'm going for a swim. Awesome. I'm going for a walk. So I have different strategies whereby I, used to deprogram. Rather than bottle it up and say, okay,
Do you, and so this is another thought. So what I do myself is obviously, so the listeners and you also know that I'm a recovered addict today. And so one of the things that I do is I actually get back to my counselors in my early recovery so that they know that there's hope and there's things happening. Would you encourage counselors to engage in those alumni programs so that they can actually see the progress that's happening? Because I found that some of the programs that are around our geographical location here in Edmonton, they're reluctant to go and sit in an alumni situation within the treatment center that they're in. And I'm like, if you're going to give 10% more, that's where you need to be giving your 10% more because you see it.
Right.
The other thing that I had suggested to a counselor is go to an AA meeting. Even though you're a counselor and sure you don't.
Well, there are open meetings.
Yeah. And I said, even though you're a counselor and you're not particularly an alcoholic, you're going to go into that meeting and you're going to see people who are successful through their addiction. And this may signify to you that sure, you see a lot of people who aren't making it through the process, but these people have made it through the process, right? Go to those things like Smart Recovery and see who is successful on a daily way. And I don't know if you share this opinion, but I'll throw this opinion out there. I kind of feel like counselors in the field of addiction healthcare put their success benchmark too big. So it's not just getting them to treatment. It's also are they going to be recovered for a long period of time? And to me, that's too big. Would you consider or suggest to a counselor to rein that back a little bit in a way where, if they're sober for a day, you're successful. You helped in that success, right? And I think that's where a lot of counselors miss that. And I'm going to go out there, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. I'm just saying this is my observation. There's 2 counselors out there. There's counselors who come from alcoholic families and want to help. And then there are people who are addicts and alcoholics themselves who are in the field, went to school, so on and so forth. And what I find is those who come from families of alcoholics and working in the field, because they're codependent in the context of they need to see success from that person in order to validate what they could have done for their family, so to say, it falls apart. And they fall apart quite quickly. And I think for anybody who's in this field, you need to identify where you sit on the fence.
You got that right. And I think it not only goes to people in the helping profession. I have had quite a number of friends who went to become EMS workers.
Okay.
They didn't last more than a year because I cannot handle this.
Yeah.
And I think we need to look back at our education system. Do we do enough in prepping people for occupations to take? I mean, I might love being an engineer, but the other person, that may not be his love affair. Or as much he may be brilliant, but it's not the type of thing. And Germany has one of the most beautiful model. They have one of the highest skilled workforce. And believe it or not, 25% of their workforce is apprenticed.
Wow.
Not only the trades.
Wow.
But their model is so neat, and I think we have made strides over the years, but we still need, okay, I want to be a teacher because it's short days, lots of holidays, and go out there and experience it. It's stressful.
Yeah.
Am I really cut out to be a teacher?
Yeah.
Yes, you get a lot of holidays. Yes, it's a short year. But can you handle and the changing times that we're in?
Yeah.
Like when we were growing up, and you would know that the teacher was in charge.
Yeah.
Now teachers have to be very, very careful.
Yeah.
If they hug a kid, they might be considered,
Yeah.
So I think getting back to what I'm saying, we need to prep people as they decide to go in, no matter what profession.
So do you think that there needs to be more work within the practicum piece?
You got it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not going to say where because that would be throwing them under the bus, but I was frontline worker, as you know, at a facility here in the city. And we would get practicum students all the time. And then they would say, oh, I love this job. And they're doing, we're already 12-hour shifts. So then they would decide, I love it so much, I'm going to do 16 hours. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Until somebody shit their pants because I worked in an intox, right? So the guy shit their pants and is now flinging their feces at the practicum student.
Right.
And they're going, I'm not cut out for this.
No,
of course you're not. You know what I mean?
And that's a very, very good example where people need to get a really damn good picture.
Yeah. I mean, so before the show, you and I had discussed about a junior entrepreneurs program that I'm starting. So one of the things that some of these professionals in the city who are willing to sit on that committee are wanting to do is they want to take these youth, high-risk youth who are ex-drug dealers, so on and so forth, and actually allow them to job shadow. Right. So could you imagine? So that's a huge deal for these kids, right? So when I went to Edmonton Youth Offender Center, one of the first things I said to them is that I was sitting in a suit because I usually wear a suit if I'm not on the show or if I'm doing other things, right? And I was sitting in a suit and they're kind of looking at me like, and this is my second engagement with them. And they're looking at me like, oh, you're just going to screw me over, whatever. And I said, you know what? I have earned wearing this suit. This suit allows me into places where you guys can't get to because your candy is not wrapped right. And I said the people who want to work with you, the first quality that they want from you is to go out and buy a suit. So that when they call you to come in and job shadow them, you're ready and capable and willing to go. They don't want to have to call you on a Friday because you're going to show up in a pair of jeans and a sweater. They want you ready, capable, and willing to be there. And in that capacity, some of these kids are going to be sitting with the Ice District, which is Keats's thing, right? Some of them are going to be sitting with a fight shop. Some of a whole bunch of different entrepreneurs are coming in on this thing in order to work with them. And I agree. I think that is the way to go, especially seeing how the accreditation of the universities has been just chopped down now. I mean, we're sitting in a podcast right now that sounds professional, so on and so forth. When it's out there, I didn't go to school for any of this. I didn't go to school for social media. How did I do this? YouTube and, reading articles, right? That's the new form of education these days. And I think that's the same thing almost with the health industry. As much as we have people coming out of university with the healthcare label or mental health care label, there's a value from somebody who's coming up as a recovered addict over a long period of time, being a life mentor, a life coach, right? We really miss that piece. I think when you came in about the evolution of drug treatment, we had more of that back then, but it wasn't great either. I think that there needs to be a real symbiosis between the two that needs to be encouraged once again. I think we've missed that, but that's my personal feeling.
And you're right on, because this is why the University of Hamilton has one of the most successful medical program.
Really?
They go through, there's a benchmark marks, that's not it. There's several other areas. You get interviewed by the general public, by student doctors, and they're putting out some of the, better doctors, because they are not just looking because you're a genius. Okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a genius.
Yeah.
To do well in medicine either.
Yeah.
But I've had a number of friends while I was at university, and all they could talk about is the big money. And I said, you understand the amount of hours you have to put in, especially when you're doing your internship.
Yeah.
And it seemed, so they have a misperception.
Yeah.
So they may be successful, but emotionally, are they prepared for that?
Yeah. We had Dr. Shapiro in a little while ago, and we were talking about how he prepared himself for success. And he literally, his answer came back was, I was just sitting in it. He didn't know, like it was a lottery shot the first time that he was successful in the Edmonton protocol, right? He's like, I didn't expect that there'd be 7 successes that didn't need insulin. He's like, it just happened. And then all of a sudden I'm sitting in front of a crowd of 500 people as first year out of his practicum time, right, in research, and here he is sitting in front of like 500 to 700 people in basically a lecture hall, with a successful Edmonton protocol.
Right.
He's like, I could not have prepared myself for that, because he's like, I just, as I would say, lottery won a success in that way. And I said, well, how do you continuously practice that kind of success? And he's like, you don't really. Like, he couldn't give me an answer. But one of the things that I've come to do in my own personal life is I try to practice success in the context of I get up, I humble myself in the morning, then I go and work out, and then from working out, I get on with my day. And as long as I get those 2 things done, I'm successful. And as long as I don't have to do something I dislike in order to earn a living, I'm successful in that capacity too. Because earning money doesn't really mean that I'm successful. What success is
it's a small part.
Yeah.
It's all in context.
And it'll happen. Earning will happen eventually, because you're producing something into
we cannot
society.
downplay it, but it's only one part of living.
So we're getting to a place where I got to ask you, we're going to kind of spin on a heel a little bit. We're going to talk about how does a family stay healthy, like parents, so on and so forth, while dealing with an addict in active use. What are some of the suggestions you might give to a family where they're dealing with, let's say, adolescent who's using? How can they detach? What are healthy boundaries? How do they go about that, would you suggest?
Well, I think definitely through the help of a professional, where you work with a counselor who can give suggestions, like right now I'm working with a family, I can, without calling name, make reference to that wonderful family, and clearly they were trying to take control. Their daughter would be hidden in the basement. Even if she wasn't drinking, the red flags went up, and they would be monitoring. I said, listen, I understand you're demonstrating care, but right now we have to let her take ownership.
Yeah.
And, if she does have a slip, is it okay for you to share it with your parents? And they're making some fantastic progress.
You know what?
So I think the key thing is to have them establish some ground rules,
Mm-hmm.
changing that behavior. Trust doesn't come overnight.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just said to the young girl who's abusing, I said, okay, you want your parents to trust you. Demonstrate the behaviors and it will come.
Mm-hmm.
But don't sit there and 1 week and say, oh, trust me now, I'm okay.
And is this person using, like, currently?
Stop.
Or okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I have, so I'm gonna,
But have had a few slips. Yeah.
one of the things too that I'm gonna say is, how right is that where the parents are like, I'm just going to take control and you can't do this anymore? And so this is what I've always suggested as a question. So you accept your child.
Yes.
Sure. Now you need to ask yourself a question. Do you accept your child as an addict?
Mm-hmm.
Because the child that you're looking at that moment being sick is not your child.
Mm-hmm.
This is a child with an addiction problem.
Right.
And this is, if you want to call it an exorcism or a demon or whatever you want to do in order to label it, the addiction itself makes that person's personality completely change. They don't want to rob you. They don't want to steal from you. They don't want to run around, God knows, and do whatever they're doing. But the fact of the matter is they love that addiction way more at this moment than they love you as parents.
Right.
And so as parents, you need to accept that if you're going to accept your child as an addict in your house, you need to accept the addiction. And if you're not willing to do that, then you need to make a clear-cut line saying, look, you can't be in here until you decide that you're going into recovery.
Correct.
Right? And I think that one of the most difficult things that I hear a lot from families, so to say, is the tough love approach. I was with somebody, I'm not going to say their name, but I was with somebody a little while ago who vehemently disagreed with me in the tough love approach. And this person basically said to me, well, how can it be that way works, so on and so forth? And I said, look, I'm not saying that either way works. What I appreciate is somebody's bottom. I appreciate where they had to go in order to come to recovery as an addict, waiting with arms wide open, right? And so I said, you as a parent need to realize what your boundaries are. And it's okay if your boundary is, I can't have them in my house using. That's fine. That's okay. That's why we have things like detox centers, hospitals, so on. That's why you pay your beautiful tax money, right? So what would you suggest if somebody was in that term? Would you give them like a pros and cons exercise?
Oh, most definitely. And each family function differently. Number one, you have to make sure that you let your child know that I love you unconditionally.
Yeah, yeah.
What your certain behaviors does not make you a bad person.
Yeah.
But I hurt inside. So it's being non-judgmental, but also clearly stating this is how I feel. And you would use a number of behaviors and examples and say, okay, if you guys are okay, this is the approach we're going to take. And as you rightly said, if you cannot tolerate it, you cannot bear to have them in the house, there is treatment out there.
Yeah.
So you look at the options.
Yeah.
But and to be specific, I hate your guts. No.
Yeah.
I don't like the fact that I see that you're killing yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you indulge in that type of behaviors, it's direct, it's specific. I love you very dearly, but I dislike what you're doing.
Yeah.
Very distinct.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that's where you rightly said you need a counselor or somebody within that profession to help a parent guide through that, to really know, because I think sometimes we second guess whether our boundaries are healthy. You know, and a professional view sometimes can really rein that in.
Yeah. And remember, we're humans, and, sometimes it's easy as a counselor on the outside to say this, but you have to also give families time to develop these skills and approaches in handling the problem, because we're only human.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I also would suggest, so how do you feel about families, said addict is in treatment, right? And would you encourage them going to see a counselor or Al-Anon or something of that nature so that they can accept that they're just as sick as the addict? I mean,
all of the above.
So let's talk a little bit about the sickness of the family with the addict. So we'll go into a little bit of codependency.
Right.
Right. How can one recognize that they might be codependent?
Well, it begins to happen over time, and I have seen some families where they would, almost make excuses for the addict. They're doing this because whatever the reasons. But you have to not get caught in that trap. I've seen with couples sometimes because they're not happy with one of their partners who is an addict. So, well, I can't win them, I'll join them.
Yeah.
So that's a way of their feeling that they're either connecting or helping them. They're not. So that's where the professional helps comes in.
Okay.
And as you rightly said, that's where you have, supports groups like any and for family members.
Yeah.
And as a counselor, these are the things that you would, I have on occasions have families hook up with each other as a support.
Okay.
Yeah. Two spouses, for example.
Okay.
To connect. So I think there's a lot of different approaches to helping the family.
Yeah, and I think the family needs to identify that.
And earlier, the better.
Yeah, like they need to identify that they're just as sick, just because the addict is the one who's using, and that's obviously sickness, right? It's a disease, right? The family needs to accept that they're also deficient in this. Well, they also have an illness, and it's called probably codependency. Yeah. And I think it's so easy for families to say, well, they're the ones with the problem, not me, and that's in my opinion, it's not going to help. Like, if you want to help your kid or help your child or help your loved one, go and seek out the help that you need in order to be prepared for them when they come back, because they're not coming back the same person either after addiction.
No.
Well, we can go on forever, I think. But this is about our hour, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. But I thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks.
I'm sure we're going to have you back in on the show.
Okay.
Did you have a good time?
It's always a pleasure.
So I'm gonna wrap this up. Shout outs to Liam Connolly at Connolly Law for all of your Canadian law, will, estate, and media issues. Please Google Liam Connolly at Connolly Law. If you'd like to become a Pride member for free, you can go to www.lifeonlifestermspodcast.com. Give us your email and sign up to be a Pride member today. You'll get all of our content and updates on the ready, like right now. And this is free. We're also going to have t-shirts out in the next couple weeks. If you'd like to pre-order, please pre-order at www.lifeonlifestermspodcast.com. It'd be much appreciated. Hope you guys are having a wonderful Thursday, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.